Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Articulate Fly, and we're back with another On the Salt with Captain David Blinken. David, how are you?
I'm good, Marvin. How are you doing this week?
As always, just trying to stay out of trouble, and it's kind of funny. You were lamenting the northeast wind, and I was saying that it made me happy down here in the south because it was dropping the temperature and lowering the humidity.
Well, all the crowds have cleared out from the east end of Long Island now, and I want to get some serious fishing in with some clients. And of course, the first thing that happens is we get a northeast wind. So, but we'll this time of year it occasionally happens, and it sort of turns around midday and comes south, and then we can fish. It just means, delaying our start. That's about it, really.
Yeah, I got it. And I think the last time we spoke, you were hopeful to start that you'd start seeing false albacore. Has that been the case?
They've been spotty. They've been up in New England, the Jersey Shore, and in Western Long Island, and you hear reports of them here and there. I just got a report literally minutes before we got on air of albies over in Long Island. I should say Rhode Island, probably around Watch Hill, and they should, if they're there, they should be in Montauk and Gardiner's Bay any second. So I'm hoping when I get out there tomorrow, I'm going to be greeted by a bunch of hardtails.
Yeah, there you go. And so were you chasing stripers or blues today?
So we were sight fishing for stripers today, which was a lot of fun. I'll send along a photo later, but we got a couple of nice bass in the upper 20-inch range, and then when that turned off, we went and turned our sights on bluefish and had some fun with them as well. So, all in all, it was a nice day.
Well, there you go. Well, I got a question for you from Brenner, and he was interested in getting your thoughts on, if you're going to fish at night in the salt, what can you do to improve your odds?
Well, there's a number of things you can do to improve your odds, but I would tell you this: before you start fishing a night spot, fish it in the day. And the reason why is you want to look at it both at high and low tide, get an idea of which way the water's moving and how it's moving through the area you're going to be fishing at night. The other important thing is the other important reason why you're going to fish it during the day is so that at night, after getting to know it during the day, when you're walking around those spots, you don't fall into a hole. I mean, that's, the worst possible thing ever. So, improving your odds is getting to know the place in the tides, getting to know the topography. And then, of course, we can talk about fly selection. And, it's such a broad question. If you're using swimming flies, you can use, a lot of people like black flies because it makes a nice profile at night. I myself like to use white flies. I've had a lot of luck using just straight white flies. They kind of stand out, especially if there's a little bit of light. Other things that are fun to use are things like gurglers or sliders or poppers. And, they don't need to make a lot of noise. They just need to make maybe just a very subtle V-wake on the water. You're not really ripping it at night, but it's more of a nuanced kind of fishing. So these are some things to think about. Of course, being very familiar with your equipment. That is another important way to improve your chances. Understanding what a cast feels like and knowing how far you're throwing. So my night fishing line at the 60-foot mark has a little bump in it that I've done just by tying some thread and gluing it. So I actually have an idea of how far I'm throwing to my target area. So I have that little wrap of thread on the line at around my 60-foot mark. And, if you're fishing smaller areas, you could have your little tied on piece of thread at, let's say, your 40 or your 50-foot mark. Because at night, the last thing you want to do is turn on a light. That can potentially scatter the fish and give them a warning. And if you are going to use a light, the best thing to do is have a red lens over your light. It won't be seen or perceived by the fish as easily as, let's say, a white, blue, or a green, or even a yellow light. So I would say if you're going to have a headlamp or something, have a red lens over it, and of course, try not to shine it on the water. Um, and of course, going back to the topography, um, if you really know your topography well, let's say you're fishing a deeper spot in the nighttime, you might want an intermediate line. I tend to fish more floating lines because I feel like in the evenings they're looking up at bait, unless it's sand eels, which bury in the sand, every night, right at dusk, and then when they tend to do close to the low tide mark, close to shore at the low tide mark if you're fishing in a bay or an estuary. And in those situations, I'm definitely using a floating line, very slender flies, and I tend to fish, that particular situation is really great at twilight, like an hour before sunset to, an hour after sunset, and then kind of have a dead period very often once it gets perfectly black. And then all of a sudden you'll notice an hour into the darkness, things start to pick up again. So, just being aware of all these situations, being aware of the area you're fishing by scoping it out during the day, both at high and low tide, and getting to know the currents. And then, your fly selection and line selection, all these things, culminate together to really give you a successful outing. And one last thing, especially if you're fishing the Northeast, is every fish you reel in is a bluefish. And I'm saying that more metaphorically, because if you're going to lip a fish at night and you think you're just catching stripers, you could be in for a really unfortunate surprise. So really carefully look at each fish you bring in on the fly. Even if it's with 15-pound test, you can land a bluefish. So really make sure you know what animal that is on the end of your line so you don't, hurt yourself really badly. And that really kind of covers it in our short little forum here.
Yeah. Any thoughts, by the way, on kind of moon phase or anything like that in your neck of the woods?
Moon phase is really interesting. I personally don't like fishing the full moon during the day. I find it a day before the full to a day after the full is really bad. But that being said, when I'm night fishing under a full moon, that very often is proven to be very good. And just a really quick story. The summer my daughter was born, I was in Martha's Vineyard fishing under a full moon at Lobsterville Beach. And I was just out there flipping a 7-weight, getting little schoolie stripers. And lo and behold, I caught the biggest striped bass of my life on a fly rod that evening under the full moon. It was about 47 inches long. And, that was a pretty neat moment for me. Yeah. So that's my full moon story. But during the day, full moons tend to be my least productive. But at night, full moons have been very generous. And new moons can be great as well. But I think the full moon will also allow you to see fish swirling and eating bait that hasn't buried into the sand for the evening, as long as you can get at the right angle and there's no clouds.
Got it. And folks, we love questions on the articulate fly. You can email them to us or DM us on social media, whatever is easiest for you. And if we use your question, I will send you some articulate fly swag. You're drawing for the Royal Wolf line of your choice. And I guess, David, before I let you give everyone housekeeping details, we should give a shout out to our friend Steve Ramirez, because his last book in the casting series, Casting Homeward, got released over Labor Day weekend.
Yeah, it did. And I really strongly suggest everyone buy it, because, Steve doesn't just write about fishing. Steve writes really about the experience in his life and how things relate. It's such a fun way to read a book that isn't so hyper focused on one particular thing. It's really, when you read Steve's books, you're actually seeing what Steve is saying instead of reading it. It's really he writes beautifully.
Yeah, absolutely. And, David, if someone wants to get on the bow of your boat, what should they do?
They can go to my website, davidblinken.com or northplatsguiding.com. And they can also email me at davidblinken@gmail.com.
Well, there you go. Well, folks, as I always say, you owe it yourself to get out there and catch a few. Tight lines, everybody. Tight lines, David.
Tight lines, Marvin.